So my views on any host of issues are about as liberal and progressive as they come, and yet I'm continually referred to as a moderate. And in fact, progressives attacked me as being gullible for believing that the Republicans are worse than Democrats when it comes to the control of lobbyists and the super rich. Let's talk about that in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, maybe you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, maybe even click the little bell that will notify you when I post something new. So outside of someone who's a true socialist or nihilist, you're not really going to find someone with more progressive views than me. And that's on a whole host of issues, which include race, which include gender, which include sexuality, which include economic justice and criminal justice. I gotta tell you, I'm about as liberal as they come. And yet throughout my life, I've been accused of being a moderate, sometimes even of being a sellout. And it makes me realize that perhaps as Democrats and progressives and liberals, we need to talk about more of what unifies us as opposed to what divides us. I'm especially disturbed when I see progressives saying things like Democrats are just as bad as Republicans. That simply is not true. And if you needed proof of that, then you should have just taken a look at the Trump years over the last 4 years and the difference that we've had under the Biden administration. I mean, during the Trump years, they literally had corporate lobbyists in positions where they were supposed to be protecting the environment, selling out the environment to everybody. Whereas now in the Biden administration, we actually have people who are trying to protect the environment. We actually have efforts to try to reduce tailpipe emissions and try to increase the number of electric vehicles on our roads and to try to address climate change. These are things that not only weren't happening during the Trump administration, but during the Trump administration, they were actually trying to undo. During the Trump administration, we had the biggest tax giveaway to the rich in the history of our country. And now we have President Biden and the Democrats trying to undo that and trying to increase taxes on the rich. Is it increasing as much as I would like? Is it increasing as much on wealth as I might like? No, but at least they're taking steps in the right direction. And I was no fan of Merrick Garland being appointed as Attorney General. I mean, I knew that he was someone who is a moderate who is not going to rock the boat. And that's certainly what we've seen here. He hasn't pursued prosecutions against the Trump cronies as much as I would have liked to see. I mean, the Trump administration was basically a lawless criminal enterprise, and those people need to be held accountable for what they did. If they aren't, then there'll be nothing stopping future administrations from doing the same thing that they did, and Merrick Garland has refused to move forward with these prosecutions. But at the same time, he's suing the Phoenix Police Department over its abusive practices against black men. And he's filing legal actions against efforts to try to suppress the vote. This is quite a contrast from the Trump administration, which not only politicized the Justice Department and tried to make it into something that was just there to serve the personal interests of Donald Trump, but used it to actually reduce the efforts to try to address police violence against black men. And in fact, basically to weaponize it against the Black Lives Matter protests. Now, it may not be ideal, but it's better than the alternative. Listen, I'm as outraged as any Democrat over the behavior of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. I've been calling for the elimination of the filibuster for years. Frankly, I've also been calling for packing the Supreme Court. But to say that Democrats would be better off without them in office is crazy. Without the two of them in office, the Democrats wouldn't even be able to approve President Biden's picks for the cabinet. And any nominations for judge and potentially Supreme Court justice would be stalled by Dr. No, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. God forbid if he were Majority Leader again. Oh my God. The damage that's being done by the Supreme Court to women's rights, to minorities, to the right to vote, to labor rights are incalculable. And to say that we'd be better off with a Republican in charge continuing to stack the court is basically turning a blind eye to the pain that these people are causing. As Democrats and progressives, we should be concerned about making people's lives better, not worse. And Joe Manchin, for all my criticisms of him, remember the fact that he's the guy who is pushing for expansion of unemployment benefits. And his proposal for a bill to address the attacks on voting rights is actually pretty good. It may not include everything that we like, but frankly, some of the things that progressives have been pushing for in that bill are probably unconstitutional. If we end up passing the proposal that Senator Manchin has been putting together, this would be the most dramatic impact on protecting voting rights since the 1960s. So are Democrats better than Republicans? Always. Are they perfect? No, but nobody is. Why do I feel the need to make a video like this? Because of the fact that this type of idle talk is actually seriously damaging. Need an example? Look at the loss of Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump. In a number of states, including my home state of Michigan, if frustrated progressives hadn't gone and voted for Dr. Jill Stein, Hillary Clinton would have been the president. And even though she's not perfect, I know Hillary Clinton's not perfect. Even though she's not perfect, it would have meant that right now, the Supreme Court would be a progressive body as opposed to the conservative body that it is now. And we can go back even farther when frustrated progressives voted for Ralph Nader over Al Gore. I mean, I don't need to revisit that election, for crying out loud. But the reality is, had everybody voted for Al Gore rather than splitting the vote, you wouldn't have Samuel Alito and John Roberts on the Supreme Court right now. And Samuel Alito, frankly, is probably the most conservative member of the court right now. He's been the one writing the decisions that have been most damaging to women's rights and to labor rights. And what's more, we wouldn't have had the Iraq War. I don't know how any Democrat can stand by or any progressive can stand by and say that we were better off with George W. Bush in office taking us to a needless war than having Al Gore in office, who frankly was quite committed to protecting the environment. And we probably would have taken steps toward addressing the climate crisis a lot earlier than we did. So please spare me the arguments that Democrats are just as bad as Republicans. They definitely are not. They're not perfect. I get frustrated with them as much as anybody. I wish that they would do certain things that they don't do. I even get frustrated with President Biden, for crying out loud. I was incredibly frustrated with President Obama. Does that mean that I would ever consider voting for a Republican for president? No. Does it mean that I wouldn't show up to vote in a midterm election or in a presidential race? No. Because I know that the alternative is so much worse. And this country, frankly, cannot survive another 4 years of a Trumpist MAGA president. If that were to happen, we surely would end up as a fascist regime. And that's not something that I can abide by. So I'm calling on all progressives and liberals. Yes, when we need to argue among ourselves, let's do so. Yes, let's push our elected officials to be more progressive and to push for policies that are going to help people. But at the end of the day, let's come together and make sure that we're electing the most progressive candidate possible. And always, at this point in history, always that's going to be the Democrat. And if we don't do that, there are going to be so many people hurt that we just won't be able to live with ourselves. Well, if you agree with me or disagree with me, I'd love to hear your comments down below. And if you could give me a like or a subscription to this channel, I'd sure appreciate that. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.